Let's all roll.
Congratulations.
I'm delighted you're all here and it's so well attended for Lauro Vazquez to read tonight our Sparks Law. I'm Orlando Menace, Director of Creative Writing at the moment. And as you probably know, I'm a poet. And I will be introducing another poet who also dabbles or delves into fiction. Lauro Vazquez is a graduate of our program, as you all know, where he was co-editor and contributor at Letras Latinas, the literary program at Notre Dame's Institute for Latino Studies. His poems have appeared in Mandorla, Paragraffiti, the McNeese Review, and elsewhere, and recently garnished him a fellowship from Cantamundo. Now, in addition to winning this fellowship, Lauro has not only won the Nicholas Sparks Fellowship, but also the Sam Hazo Poetry Award last year, the Mitchell Award, the Billy Mage Academy of American Poets Prize, and an American Dream Civil Grant in 2012. In addition, I would like to note that he was a guest poet recently at Iowa State University in Ames, Iowa, as well as a guest poet at the Harold Washington College in Chicago. I was really delighted and honored to have directed Lauro's thesis, and I will add some more personal words to this introduction. Lauro, in all the time that he has been in this program, has made tremendous strides as a poet who grounds his cross-cultural poetics in a sophisticated fusion of myth and history. He brilliantly inhabited the persona of the Cimarron, the Maroon, Caliban, of Macandal at Bois Caiman, and other revolutionary figures to create his own revolutionary poetics. Please welcome Lauro Vazquez.
I'm a little tipsy, so some water. Thank you, Orlando, for that introduction. Thank you, Joel and Johannes and Susan for helping me grow as a poet. And thank you, everybody, for being here. My mom, who flew in from California. Oh, yeah. Last time I read here, I wore a soccer jersey. But I put on a blazer because my mom was like, you need to dress like this. So. Anyway, I'll start. I am gonna start with an ode. I tried writing an ode a long time ago. A year ago actually, in Susan's workshop, and I failed miserably. But this ode has been brewing in me for a while, and I just wrote it down. I just wrote it this morning before we got on the train. So it's been a long process to write this ode. It's called Ode to a Pretzel, and the genesis of it is in 2002, President George W. Bush choked on a pretzel and he fainted from it. So this is my ode to a pretzel. It's been 12 years since President George W. Bush choked on you, little pretzel. You, soft enemy combatant, baker's mujahideen, bread armed with salt crystals, partisan pastry risen, hardened in ovens stoked by axes of evil bakers. It's been 12 years, sinister little knot, noose twined on kitchen table. It's been 12 years since you roped yourself, asphyxiating the president's neck, momentarily falling and fainting him, bruising him on the cheek and lip as if by enhanced interrogation. And no, you have not been added to a kill list. You are not penned up at Guantanamo. You are not thrown out of grocery stores where I will buy a bag of pretzels that I will take on with me on a plane and give to my 3-year-old niece. No, we do not live in fear of rendition. There are no black zones, no secret CIA-trained death squads waiting for us at the corner market when we walk out with a bag of pretzels. We ought to build shrines to you, little pretzel, as they do in Mexico whenever the Virgin appears on a half-burnt tortilla. Or as they do in India, where motorcycles and the English language are worshipped and toy airplanes are given out as offerings. Yes, we should give you out to eat, little pretzel, give you out every day of every year. Pretzels for 9-year-old Ali Kinani, dead from a gunshot wound to the head in the Nicer Square massacre. Pretzels along the US-Mexico border. Pretzels for Trayvon and for Jordan. Pretzels for Florida and for every tree and telephone pole where hung the beautiful bodies of black people. And yes, little pretzel, we ought to give you out to children as they did in Europe, where monks first baked and shaped you to resemble two hands coming together in prayer. I too bring my hands together for you, little pretzel, not in prayer, no, not in asking for supplication or forgiveness, but in angry celebration, hand meeting hand, hard and strong, as if a fist or executioner's robe, hand meeting hand, strong, very strong, to make sure the noose won't come loose from his throat. This next poem, these next series of poems are very different from this last ode, and they're sort of portraits to revolutionaries, conquistadors, and crazy people who from history, who I found lived poetic lives, and who I want to sort of give back to tribute in poetry. Some of them were not pleasant figures, like this figure of Vasco Núñez de Balboa, who this poem is about Vasco Núñez de Balboa. A lot of these poems have these little epigraphs before the poems because they're sort of intertextual poems. I did a lot of research to write these poems, and so I would find something that was inspiring or that I wanted to write against. I would write these poems. Balboa was credited with finding the Pacific, and on his way through Panama, what is now Panama, he found a community of homosexual Indians, and he had 40 of them fed to his dogs because he was so appalled by this colony of sodomites. So I want to read something that I read about this incident, which is where the poem stems from, and hence the title of the poem, Homophobes. When Balboa found the king's brothers surrounded by men smooth and effeminately decked who engaged in sodomy, he had 40 of them given for a prey to his dogs. The dogs threw themselves upon the Indians as though they were wild boars or timid deer. When the dogs had satisfied their rage and appeased their appetite, the remains were burnt. Also, I grew up in California, Northern California, very close to San Francisco. In San Francisco, there is a park called Balboa Park, which I assume that it's named after him, although I'm not sure. But I imagine Balboa in San Francisco, which is a very lively center of LGBT people. On the moon, there is a crater named after him, and a park in San Diego, and one street and underground station in Madrid, and all of the Pacific leading to the Panama Canal and all of the isthmus, where parrots still float through currents more colorful than Monet water lilies. His face and name are bartered on an equal basis with the dollar. And all that is fine and whatnot for a great conqueror like Balboa. But what must have really ticked off Vasco Núñez de Balboa was when I sat next to him on a bench in San Francisco's Balboa Park. And what was a man like Balboa doing in San Francisco? I recognized him by his eyes and by the green rubble of Moorish castles scattered across the Guadiana bank of those palm-frond irises, and by the feral parrots of Telegraph Hill, perched right there on his brow and unable to fly, as though a string attached to their little claws, and by his dog Loncico, the one the 40 Indians were fed to, his gums like the pulp of a tamarindo, just 6 feet from us, and squabbling with a seagull over some fish gods. And what was a man like Balboa doing in San Francisco? Past the Golden Gate, Balboa watches Cueva Indians die for pearls like torpedoes flying through the Straits of Darien. And what was a man like Balboa doing in San Francisco? In the Castro, Balboa catches sight of lambda flags, oranges and yellows, iridescent silvers and purples spread in the air as if a great sailfish over the Bay of Panama. And Choco canoes over in Golden Gate Park, and in Haight-Ashbury, earthquake conch shells of tie-dye sharpnel, as if the 40 transvestites were reflowering over in Quaregua. And what was a man like Balboa doing remembering the 40 in San Francisco? Sweet and timid like deer shivering under the California rain, like Choco children chasing fireflies under Union Square. Balboa, sweet and wet moss, milky pistols of the 40, shivering like fireflies in Quaregua and Union Square and other places at other times. And what was a man like Balboa doing remembering the 40 in San Francisco? Like Orlando mentioned, I'm interested in revolutionaries and martyr figures. I grew up in Santa Rosa, which is north of San Francisco, which is predominantly white and Mexican. And it's very rare for you to stumble onto people from other places. I met a guy by the name of Memo, who was from Nicaragua. He was a car mechanic, and he was a Sandinista in Nicaragua. The Sandinistas were a revolutionary group who named themselves after Santino. Santino was martyred in Nicaragua in the 1930s. He fought off a U.S. invasion of Nicaragua and was afterwards martyred, killed. And so, I mean, I tend to kind of, idealize these people, but there's also sort of a human side to them that to me was captured by Memo. Like Memo was kind of disillusioned of the revolution and immigrated to the U.S. But anyway, I'll read the epigraphs that sort of touch on these issues about martyrs and how, for instance, Sandino, when they killed him, they never found his body, but his family members are still looking for the physical body to bury him. It is poetic to say Sandino's spirit lives through Nicaragua, but we want to bury him physically in a cemetery like anyone else. This is Sandino's grandson, quoting the New York Times. We searched and searched, said graveyard administrator Elias Zapata, a stout former Sandinista Special Forces soldier. The remains are gone. It is like the hands of Che Guevara. I never thought I'd come out of this war alive, but I always believed it was a necessary war. That was Sandino, 1934. So this quote about the hands, I was reading about Sandino, and when he was murdered, he was killed along with his father, his two favorite generals, and a poet by the name of Safonias. And so I imagine them holding hands as they're murdered, and that's the genesis of the poem. It's titled Interventions. And Augusto Cesar Sandino did not fight in Marines up in the mountains, even though they hunted him with airplanes and trucks and with floodlights and tear gas bombs and with radios and dogs and police. And Sandino fought the war smiling from up there like a miniature lily clenched to the mountainside, sprayed with pellets of rain and mist and light drizzles, and sleeping with a rifle slung over the shoulder and wrapped in blankets, smelling slightly of coffee and sweat. And it wasn't until after the war that he was betrayed, shot down at 39 by the National Guard, together with his father and brother Socrates and his two generals Estrada and Umansor and the poet Safonias. Together, holding hands together against the firing squad. Those hands, are they making funny faces like school children behind the teacher's back? Are they clumsy and heavy like donkeys with their big human eyes, nimble and light like seagulls, full like breasts filled with milk? Those hands, are they hiding their soft touch under rough and yellow fingernails? Yellow and soft like bees, like big drops of honey, carrying grapevines to the honeycomb, filling the honeycomb with all they touch. I'm going to switch a little bit and read some poems for a second, dealing with Mexican history and identity, kind of from a historical point of view. I'll start with a poem I wrote that I sent to a friend, and he really liked it, and he asked me to read it today, so I'll do that. It's kind of a love poem, but it's a political poem. I started out writing poetry because of Pablo Neruda. He wrote a book called Love Poems and the Song of Despair, 20 love poems, and I bought it when I was a junior in high school, but I never understood it. Like, I remember he wrote something in there like, oh, like her body's like a leaf, and I was like, what the fuck? Like, I was like, I'm not into leaves, so I threw it away, I put it aside, but later, once I had more life experience, I understood what he was talking about. So to me, like, love poetry is always like, it's a metaphor in and of itself for political poetry. So this is kind of what this is about. It's titled Love Poems. The problem with writing love poems is that I'm always needing to write another kind of poem. I need to write about manifest destiny and how Walt Whitman cheered on the Americans during the Mexican War, and how he called for Mexico to be crushed and punished, and how as a child I imagined Mexico on the map looked like a hammerhead shark, and how Whitman wanted my country stripped and bound to a fishing rod, bound to the deck of his boat, bloody and finless beneath the heels of his boot soles. But my problem with Walt began when I awoke with a song that grew like a finch or a fish in my ears. That type of fish feeds only on a diet of poems, and that's no problem because books of poetry abound, and it's not hard finding them gathering dust on the shelves. But the real problems came later when there were no more books and no more room for a fish in the house. Mama would look at the fish with contempt, arguing that there was always another mouth to be fed. I remember when I fell in love and we were both dying of hunger, I because of love and the fish because of a lack of a book of poems. The fish used to say no problem since he had forgotten how to eat anyway. I remember when the fish disappeared either because he died of hunger or because he had turned himself into a book of love poems. The problem with poets is they are always turning themselves into a fish at the first sight of a beautiful woman at the edge of a pond. You can find them on bedroom floors flapping and grasping for water, flashing and glistening in grease, gills flaring red at the bottom of a pan, or mounted by the tail and the fins on a wall, oh poor little ones screaming or gasping for air, or stuck wedged flat like dead butterflies, or like sardines staring with horror at watery eyes from the bottom of tin cans. My poem too will end up on a bedroom floor crumpled, and it will be as if I handed her all my flowers and trees and sand dunes and boats and scarves and parrots and the revolution and Fidel's beard and beret and every childhood drawing I've made of hammerhead sharks and crocodiles and music and clouds and reefs and seahorses and every creature that roams the sea and is caught at the end of a fish hook. And the only beautiful thing will be knowing you can turn yourself into a love poem in the strangest of circumstances. The fish after he died, and now me so that you'll love me. That's actually a ripoff of Germán poet, Juan Germán. If you haven't, he died recently. He's like my hero. Like I love that guy. So I had to read that because he means a lot to me. To Mexican history and whatnot. I did a reading in October at the Arts and Culture Center, the new ILS building, and it was an exhibition on the African roots of Mexico. And I read a poem about the first sort of rebellion by a person of African descent happened in Mexico in the 17th century. A guy by the name of Yanga rose up against the Spanish and established the first free town of blacks in the Americas. And at the time, actually, Mexico had the highest population of blacks after Brazil in all of the Americas. There's a town called Cordoba, very close to where I grew up, that was actually founded by the Spanish specifically to destroy Yanga's palenque, or town of runaway slaves. And in that town, there's a lot of vestiges that remain, especially in Veracruz, about black culture in Mexico. And one of them is a fable about a mulata woman. It's called La Mulata de Cordoba, the mulata from Cordoba. And she sort of defined around her sexuality and like the effect that she had around men. There's a scholar by the name of Vicente Riva Palacio who is one of the first to write down the fable in writing. So I want to read how his story ends, and then I'll read my poem about her. It's titled Fables. La mulata was never heard from again, but it is assumed that under control of the devil she is moaning. Leave her among the flames, readers. So she was accused of witchcraft, and she was taken to Mexico City to be burned by the Inquisition. And actually, in the story, the person that tells the fable about her is the inquisitor who went crazy from gazing at her. And that's the moment where my poem starts.